The culturally reflective casework practice model consists of three main elements: attitudes, knowledge, and skills. Here in part 2 of the podcast, we explore these elements and discuss the impact that these can have on our relationships with clients, especially those who are migrants and refugees.
The culturally reflective practice framework is one that was written about by some New Zealand authors. And the reason why I use it is because I think it fits quite well into the frameworks that a lot of people use in practice anyway, that a lot of frameworks are talking about being reflective in our practice. So that's a good fit. It's also a shift from a model previously where, when I was at university, we were told, you've got to learn about the protocols. So do you shake their hand? Do you look them in the eye? It was all about learning about someone else's culture. Now, if we look at the stats that we were talking about before, the diversity is so broad that it's actually not possible to function out of a rule book approach. We can't possibly learn all the rules for every culture. So, your brain would explode, basically. You couldn't possibly do that. So what you need to do then is think about, well, how can I operate on a day-to-day basis and respond to the client in front of me in a more culturally reflective way. So what Connolly and her colleagues did was they basically established a framework to assist us to reflect. And they talked about, that we all have our own skills. So it's not a framework that is necessarily about learning new skills, although you may identify gaps in your skills that you want to fill and improve. But we all have skills. We all have skills around engagement, interviewing, casework, perhaps using interpreters. We've done that before. So we have this a bag of tools that we already use. What the framework does is it says, when you reflect on various aspects, that may influence the way that you implement those skills. And they would say there's two areas that you need to reflect on. So one is about the practitioner. So what do I bring to a situation or an interaction with a client that may influence the way that I need to implement my skills? And then secondly, what does the client bring to the situation and how might that influence my skills? So to give an example, if I held a belief or a bias that I thought that women who wore hijab were oppressed women, I might then, when I'm going into an interview, hold that belief that this woman is an oppressed woman and that she needs my help to get out of that oppression. She may not feel like she's an oppressed woman. That may not be her experience, and it may be completely wrong, but my approach then I may miss what her actual needs are because I'm focused on what I think her needs are as a Western woman looking at that woman. So I would need to adapt that. I would need to be aware that that might be one of my biases and contain that so that I didn't let that influence the interview. In terms of what I know about the other people, so say I knew that the person had come under a refugee visa, that was one of the little bits of detail that I got in a referral, then I might like to consider, well, what could be the impacts of that experience for that person? And I might think, well, I'm not going to take them into that interview room that we've got out the back that's dark and small, because that might trigger an event for them. I don't know if they've been in an experience where they've been tortured, but it's probably best to not do that. So I might find a space that's a little bit more airy, and I might also ask the client, I might be more conscious about where would the client like to meet and are they comfortable, and being using my skills of observation to see if that person is beginning to feel uncomfortable because they might have heightened anxiety.
And that's really the message. It's more so about us and our attitudes and beliefs, isn't it? I'd like to ask about how bias that we bring and the generalizations and the myths we hear from the media quite often, especially recently, have an incredible impact on how we perceive others.
And I think that's what's new, interesting about this model is it really does place a strong focus on us knowing what we take to a situation, and it includes all those things that you've just mentioned. So let's have a look at the myths for a start. if we look at stats, for example, so we hear a lot of myths on the TV, and it can be around how many refugees we're having, how many of those refugees are Muslim, and you often hear on the radio things like there's a Muslim invasion. Now, if you were to look at the statistics, you would see that 1% of the community are Muslim, and that the percentage of the community who are identifying as Christian is still more than 50% is those Christians who identify from 3 of the Christian faiths. So you can go to the statistics and see quite clearly that what's being portrayed on the media is incorrect. We need to be clear about when we're listening to what's on the media, we need to be questioning that and understanding that, because that can start to influence the way that we might approach our clients. It influences the beliefs and values that we have. And I guess beliefs and values there can be an interaction with the fears that we have. And media can play a very strong role in the creation of our fears as a community or our concerns as a community. And so, the way that can influence is that if we're holding a concern or a fear about a certain group of people, and anyone who looks like they fit that certain group of people, then we have beliefs and attitudes about those people that may or may not apply to that person. We have to be very careful about understanding what our stereotypes are. The worst thing we can do is say, I don't have any stereotypes. One of the most common sayings that my own family members will say, I'm not racist, but it's a very common statement. And I think it's naive to think that we don't have prejudicial beliefs. As human beings, we make generalisations. It's part of the way that our brain works. Now, generalisations are not dangerous in themselves. They're dangerous if you then take them through to, if you're not aware of them and you apply them in a way that is, not considered. You're not considering the impact of that. So, for example, Senge had a ladder of inference model. He's wrote a book on the 5th discipline. And one of the things he talks about is that there is this ladder of inference. So we might select some data. In a training session, I might notice that someone's yawning, and so I note that, I select that data, and I then add meaning to that, and I think, that person's bored. And I assume they're bored. I make my assumption from a generalisation. I look at them and I think, say it was, a man, I'll say, he's bored because he's sexist. I'm assuming he's I use my generalisations, he's bored because he doesn't think a woman would be able to speak intelligently about this topic or authoritatively, so I draw the conclusion that he's sexist. Now, I adopt that belief then that perhaps all men that look like him are sexist, and I take action. So I start to not ask him questions, I start to not engage him in the workshop. Now, if I actually stopped right back at the beginning when I selected the data and saw that he yawned and had a conversation with him in the break, about, I saw you were yawning, you're okay, you're just tired. And he says, look, I was up all night with my sick child, but I've been waiting to come to this workshop for months because I knew that it would be so important and relevant to my work that I got here. Well, that puts a complete stop to that ladder of inference by checking that. So not adding my assumptions and generalisations, I stop and go, well, how about, I try and take more breaks and you let me know if you're really struggling in the day, and, if you need to get up and get a coffee, you do that. So I make some exceptions for him on the basis of I now understand what's going on for him. If I hadn't have done that, I would have taken that data, I would have excluded him, and then in the next time I came to do a workshop, the first bloke that yawned in the workshop, it would reinforce it, and I would be heightened to taking that little bit of data, and that would reaffirm my belief that men are sexist and that they won't listen to women. So you can see how then it starts to build and build and build until you've got a prejudice, and then you're discriminating against people. So if you don't check it, that generalisation that you're making, then you potentially discriminate against people. And as caseworkers, we need to be on top of that. So I guess, yeah, it's that sort of